What's up? What's happening? Hoffman Show on a Tuesday. They still haven't let us cancel the Tuesdays yet, so we still show up for work. Here we are, ready to rock on a Tuesday where Will Levis is suddenly the favorite to go number one overall in the NFL draft. Well, at least according to a Reddit post and some of the betting markets. No, really, that's where we're starting the show today. We'll get to the NBA playoffs in less than 15 minutes with Chris Miles. We are streaming live, of course, on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. But, man, what a wacky, silly season it's been. The NFL draft always has this. We always have rumors. We always have different things, and you never know exactly what to believe. It was always really fun when I was on the beat going to the combine and kind of hearing some of the rumors and being able to go like, yeah, that makes sense. No, that doesn't. I don't think that's real. I mean, I remember when I was there, the combine kind of that I'll never forget of the three that I did on the beat was the year that Baker Mayfield was the guy. And you just kept hearing like, he's going to go one. He's going to go one. He's going to go one. And Mel Kiper and those folks like kind of resisted it for a long time. Mel was talking about this recently where he I think yesterday on Get Up, I was watching, he was on. He's like, the year Baker Mayfield went, in the morning, I submitted my final mock draft. I had someone else going number one. And then, Mort and Schefter wake me up basically morning of the draft saying it's going to be Baker. And you go and you make the edit and you change and off you go. And the Browns obviously did ultimately take Baker Mayfield number one overall. But because we live in this goofy information age where a rumor on the internet can get legs that are longer and faster than any time in, previous human history, all of a sudden you've got betting markets, which used to be something that that kind of led people in the know to a place of being in the know more. Like if you knew where to look, you could get a lot of information for betting markets, right? If those of you that have listened to Sheehan for years certainly know that. Like there's a reason he does the smell test, because if it stinks, it's worth betting on. And more often than not, that works. Because as my old friend Ian Fitzsimmons used to say when I worked with him down in Dallas, they don't air condition the desert because they lose. So if you can be on the side of the house more often than not, you're probably going to be in good shape. And so all of a sudden this morning, or late last night, one of the two, I think it was this morning, there's a rumor that starts floating around on a Reddit or a Reddit thread that says Will Levis is telling friends and family that he's going one to Carolina, as if Carolina told Will Levis he's going one. Now, would I lead my radio show today with a rumor from a Reddit thread that is completely unsubstantiated at this time, right? Or I should say unconfirmed at this time, right? It's not like Schefter then got on it and was like, hey, this is real, or Rappaport or someone, Joe Person, who covers the Panthers for The Athletic. Like, I'm sure they're all poking around. But I'm not leading it because it was on Reddit. I'm reading it because the betting markets responded. Levis all of a sudden is 4 or 5 to 1 in certain books. Like BetMGM had him at 5 to 1. DraftKings has him at 4 to 1. Those are odds you put out there because you either know something or you're just trying to take advantage of stupid people. Now, I do think, I shouldn't say take advantage of stupid people. What you're trying to do there is to make sure that you don't lose, right? Like the house at that point is going, well, shoot, if this thing's right, we can't keep the odds at 40 to 1, 35 to 1 where they were before this Reddit post, because we're going to lose our ass. And the house doesn't like to lose its ass. That's an unsustainable business model. And so to me, that's why I'm talking about this. That's why I think it's interesting, is because you do have a guy in Will Levis who's a super intriguing prospect. Like, Will Levis has a cannon arm. He has prototypical size. He's 6'4", 230. He's pretty athletic. He ran a 4.7 at the combine, which was moving for a quarterback. It's not Anthony Richardson or Jalen Hurts or Lamar, but You can pick up a lot of first downs in the NFL scrambling running a 4.7. Mahomes probably ran a 4.7. And his S2 score, which we talked about a little more yesterday, and we'll talk about more with Sam Fortier coming up later, was reportedly in the 90th plus percentile. So it would seem that there is some decision-making ability there that hasn't been fully tapped into yet at Penn State and Kentucky. He is definitely deficient in terms of his touch. But if there's a coach out there, and that coach, especially if it's Frank Reich, who thinks I can take this guy with physical tools and the mental makeup to be a really good quarterback and teach him to put a little more touch on the ball, teach him how to layer it, he is like a legitimately intriguing prospect at the top of this draft, especially when your other options and the guy that you think is probably or everyone thinks is the guy, and Bryce Young, is barely 6 feet tall, and his playing weight will be under 200 pounds. It's not preposterous when you say it out loud that way. Now, I think a lot of evaluators think Young is special, and the tape would suggest that Levis needs a lot of work and is raw. His mechanics are inconsistent. Even though the S2 score was good, it doesn't necessarily match the tape in terms of consistency of decision-making, especially in like recognizing blitzes and things like that. So that's probably going to win out. I think overall, it's still probably going to be Bryce Young going number 1 overall. But it's pretty freaking fascinating that the betting markets, the thing that typically leads, not follows, reacted here so violently to this Reddit rumor and not really just the rumor, but the subsequent money that came in off it. There were no, ESPN did a write-up on it. They talked to folks over at Caesars and DraftKings. There was no major money. It's not like someone put down a $300,000 bet on Will Levis to go 1. There's some $500, I think some $800 bets. But it was enough to move the market to make it stop the bleeding, in the words of one of those spokespeople. It's like we had to stop the betting. We had, there's still people betting on it, but it's not the bigger money and a lot of smaller bets coming in that accumulated like it was at 35-40-1. But we live in a pretty wild time that a Reddit thread, all of a sudden changes the betting markets to the NFL draft to the point that mainstream media, your boy, is sitting here going, I don't know, maybe, I guess, he could. They're going to get crushed for it, but they also might be right. Kind of fun to think about. But I don't know. My official, gonna go way out on a limb here. I think Bryce Young's still gonna go 1 on Thursday night. Who knows? Maybe we wake up Thursday morning and hear differently. We always get unexpected stuff. We'll make some predictions on the NFL draft, obviously, over the next couple of days. We'll also check in tomorrow with my guy Landry Locker in Houston, try to figure out what the hell they are doing down there. A lot of rumors that they're not going to go quarterback. Obviously, you'd have to think that would change if Levis went 1 and all of a sudden Young is available at number 2. But we got a bunch of great draft coverage, including Sam Fortier, coming up later in the show at 6 o'clock. Coming up next, though, our guy Chris Miles from NBA TV joins us talking NBA playoffs. LeBron, 2020. Jimmy Butler, 53. What a night and what a night to come. We talk about it all with Miles next here on The Hoffman Show.
The potential end.
the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Sam Fortier coming up at 6 o'clock. We'll check in Milwaukee, see what's the bigger story, Bucks down 3-1 or the Aaron Rodgers trade, coming up in just a little bit. But it is our pleasure right now to head out to the hotline and welcome in our old friend Chris Miles from NBA TV. See, Miles, what's up, bro?
Man, I feel like the Aaron Rodgers news was broken news from like 3 months ago that's finally coming around. So I would say the Bucks, since that's fresh, right?
I would think so.
Say.
But, I mean, it is Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. So, you know, there's that.
Yeah, it just feels like, I mean, when Adam Schefter was like, oh, I'm breaking this news, and Aaron Rodgers was like, no, it's not happening. I felt like that was the biggest thing in the world. At this point, though, I'm like, man, Jimmy Butler, 56 against the team with the best record in the NBA. I mean, they were up 15 with 5.5 to go. That was like the craziest ending. 2 nights in a row, really.
No, it is nuts that they are down 3-1, especially as Giannis comes back. I mean, let's go. Obviously, we're not talking Aaron Rodgers with you. I'm sure you have takes, but we're gonna go stick with NBA here. What do you make of the fact that they're down 3-1 in the series? It's the best team in the league. They're defensively, they've been so good for so long, and they have answers for everyone because Drew Holiday is the answer for everyone. And yet Jimmy Butler goes bananas last night. I mean, did you think that it would stop? Like, how surprised are you?
So, from my point of view, right, I worked last night, which means that I ended up watching a game with Shaq and Chuck, right? So we're all in there watching it. And when the first quarter eruption happens, to see Charles Barkley say, you know, holy expletive, I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Chuck doesn't cuss. Come on, Chris. Chuck? Get real.
I mean, for him to sit there and go, he just scored 20 straight points. This is such an incredible thing. Like, watching his reaction to it kind of put in context what we were witnessing. And then Jimmy Butler goes to the free throw line at the end of that run. I think he had like 18 points in a row or 17 in a row at that point. And he's like bent over, and I'm like, oh, we got our new meme of exhausted for the internet. And I was like, all right. He did his thing. They're still down by like 5 at the end of 1. That was really cool. His last gasp. This team is done. And then, like, he came out in the second quarter, had 2 points, and he kind of looked good in the third. I was like, all right, that was cute. Bucks up by 15. This game is over. I'm sitting there like, all right, we're going to do these post-game pressers. How am I preparing for this? Everything I'm like, you know, scribbling down on my little piece of paper is about the Bucks, like little factoids. And then all of a sudden I'm like, hold on, what's happening here, right? And I thought it was one of the most incredible fourth quarter performances, game performances I've ever seen because, like, the Bucks really are that good. And Jimmy Butler was carrying his team. I mean, he had half their points, and no one else could score. Like, no one else could get their offense going, so they needed every single bucket, and he was efficient. Just incredible to see, man.
It's wild. And, you know, they've used Giannis a lot on him in the past. Obviously, Giannis, first game back in the series. But you said it, man. Like, it took this Herculean performance from Butler. The Bucks are that good, but they're down 3-1. Teams don't typically come back from this. It's not impossible. It's not 3-0. But do you think the Bucks are toast?
So here's the thing. Regardless of who wins this series, if Miami wins the series, you do realize this will only be the 6th time that an 8th seed has beaten 1 seed, right? And it'll be the first time a team came from the play-in situation to win the first-round series. All right, so we have those two things that are also like, we've never seen this before. We never get to see this. Now, 13 teams have come back from 3-1, and if there was ever a situation to think that a team would come back from 3-1, it would be this Bucks team. Think about why they're down, right? So they're down 2-1 because Giannis played 11 minutes in the first 3 games, right? Then you're like, okay, why are they down 3-1? What happened? Well, Giannis had a triple-double, and they're up by 15 with 5.5 to go, and you could see it. They took their foot off the gas. Drew Holiday looked like a shell of himself. He was turning the ball over. Chris Middleton was like, all right, we still got them. Like, their whole body language thought that they were about to tie the series at 2-2, and Jimmy Butler was like, oh, I got other plans. So I just don't see the Bucks doing that again in the series. I think that they're going to be a dominant team for 3 straight games. That's what I think is going to happen. And I think if you might have some long odds on that, that's a bet I would place because I could see that happening.
Chris Miles, NBA TV, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So, late game last night, characterized by another superstar performance. LeBron James somehow found something to do that he had never done before. I thought we were running out of those things, but apparently 2020 is a new one for him. And I also found it, let's call it fitting, that he just puts Dylan Brooks in his place in a literal sense. On that game-winning layup or game-sealing layup, I should describe it as, to end overtime. What did you make of kind of the overall and kind of the same question of, is Memphis done in this series, now down 3-1, as the, obviously it's a little bit different. I think the Lakers were actually favored in a lot of places to win the series, but as the higher seed here.
Well, what's crazy is I think they're done because, Anthony Davis didn't have a monster game. LeBron looked gassed in that fourth quarter. Like you mentioned, the 20 rebounds. I mean, he was fighting for that in between the 8:50 mark in the fourth quarter and when he hit that, bucket to send it to overtime. He hadn't taken a shot. I mean, we're sitting there watching like, shoot, LeBron. How many times you scream that? We're like, what is going on? He's passing it to like Rui, who's getting double teamed on the perimeter. I'm like, what alternate universe am I watching right now where LeBron is deferring to Rui late? So the fact that like the Lakers really didn't play a good game, they really didn't, and they ended up winning. They have become this team that relies on their defense, and D'Angelo Russell hit some shots late. I imagine that within the next 3 games, they're going to have a game where they're either hot from the field or Anthony Davis goes off or LeBron, shoots the ball well. Like none of those things have happened, and they're up 3-1. So I do think for those reasons, the Lakers are going to pull this out in a game or two.
Kind of on a bigger picture level with the Lakers, they looked dead and without a path to get better mid-season. They pull off these trades. They get some guys that, they obviously ship off for us and get in return some guys who a lot of casual NBA fans have never heard of, but are way better fits for their roster. Your Jared Vanderbilt, et cetera. Obviously, D'Angelo Russell's been fantastic for them. Do you think that they are now set up to compete for the next couple of years of the end of LeBron's career here, where, the prospect of him leaving and wanting out, even as soon as this summer, felt so much more real in February, even if they, lose in the next round this year?
I do, but don't forget former Wizard Rui Hachimura, okay, and former Wizard Troy Brown. Don't forget those first-round picks from Washington. Okay, those guys out there. I mean, Rui was the third leading scorer for them in the playoffs coming into yesterday's game, which just made me grin ear to ear to see that. But no, I still think that they're going to make moves in the offseason in the sense of I don't know. I want to see how these playoffs play out with D'Angelo Russell and how they feel about him. But I do think that Anthony Davis is now 30, right, where you can't rely on him night in and night out for whatever reason. He just doesn't do it every single night. And LeBron clearly has aged. Like, he's aged before our eyes. We can see it. Even last night, you see how gassed he was. I think they need another guy who's just, like, trying to go out there and get his numbers on a nightly basis that's a little bit younger that might become available. So, yeah, I think this roster is a lot closer than it was with Russell Westbrook, but need, that younger guy that's out there trying to prove that he belongs, needs a max deal or wants to be an all-star, that next up-and-coming player.
Chris Miles, NBA TV, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Meanwhile, crosstown in L.A., Clippers Suns tonight, games in Phoenix, but this could be the end of the Paul George, Kawhi Leonard era. And it just feels like, if Kawhi all of a sudden retired this summer, I don't think anyone would be surprised. This knee injury has not gotten better over the course of, 4 years now, that he hasn't been able to finish seasons consistently, and he's missed a ton of games. The Clippers gave him all the injury management stuff. And I know it sounds like I'm kind of going at Kawhi. I'm not. Like, it sucks. It just sucks. It's an injury that hasn't really healed itself. But, like, what do the Clippers do from here? Because this is a $330 million payroll that ultimately, while worth the shot, never paid off. And it feels like they've got a huge decision to make that probably is smart to move on after this season in some form or fashion.
What's crazy is Kawhi is like you see what he's doing and you think, oh, man, like this is it. The first two games of this series, he had 31 in game one, right? He had 31 in game two, but he was dominating Kevin Durant, which was crazy to see. Like that first quarter of game two where they were leading before Devin Booker went off, I feel like he had like 8 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, stripped KD, and it was like, oh, man, this is happening. Clippers are about to do this and upset the Suns who, put this KD team, Booker team together. And then the knee injury. And then, he's out game 5 and his sister is convicted of murder. And you're like, wait, what is going on? All of these extra things with Kawhi. And to your point, this is 5 years in, you kind of go, this feels like a what could have been. This feels like one of those things where, man, what would have been like if he was able to play and participate in the postseason? I just think this is one of those what ifs that it ends after this year.
Yeah, it does feel like that. And, like you said, man, it's not like he's not incredible. Like game one, he's the best player on the floor, and Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are also on the floor, but you have to be on the floor. And I think of, guys like Brandon Roy, where it just went. It went just like that. And it was the same kind of thing where he'd score 28 points and look incredible and then miss the next 2 months. And you're like, what? How does this work? Or even a guy like Greg Oden, when he was out there, you saw the flashes, and he just never could stay out there. And obviously Kawhi has accomplished so much more in his career, and he's done it for a lot longer. But just a reminder of how fast it can come to an end. And I guess the other thing too, Chris, is like if you're another team, what do you do with Kawhi? Like, would you be willing to give him a max deal? Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'm another team. I mean, someone's going to, but I don't know how good I feel about it.
Well, I think we've also moved into a new era. Right, like yes, he's a 2-time Finals MVP, but he's of the previous era. So teams that are looking to, compete, like the next Clippers or like the next Lakers group that you're trying to put together, you're looking at a different group of guys. You're no longer looking at Kawhi as being the definitive answer. I do think that a short-term deal, maybe a year or two, or less money because of the injury concerns, but man, I think. If you're a team looking to max a player or try to like get a player away from another team, they're just different younger guys that you're going after, and I don't think it's Kawhi Leonard anymore.
Yeah. By the way, he's just 31 years old, and he does have a player option next year for a whopping $48 million. So if I was Kawhi Leonard, I'd probably be with the Clippers next year making $48 million. Chris Miles with us here on the Hoffman Show, of course, from NBA TV. Real quick, Warriors Kings, and then we'll talk about the home team. If De'Aaron Fox does not play in Game 5, can the Kings win at home without him?
Absolutely not. They need him on the floor to win. Look, off night is great at defending Steph, right? Let's not Davion Mitchell, right? Like let's not overlook what he presents. He was drafted in that way, showed it from day one, and he's been able to shine in this series. But your offense has to come from somewhere, and I just don't think, like, Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter have enough. Like, not against the Golden State Warriors. If you're saying against the Memphis Grizzlies or, like, another team, but not, the defending champs who have two of the greatest shooters of all time and can get offense from other places, I think Fox has to be out there, even if he's less effective. But, this injury is not one that we're familiar with. It's like broken tip of the index finger. It's like, all right, if he wasn't a point guard, like if he was a power forward or a center, we wouldn't even be talking about this. But the fact of the matter is he has to handle the ball to be effective. And I just don't know how you do that with a broken tip on your shooting hand. It just sounds like the weirdest injury I've ever heard of. Yeah,
and by the way, apparently he just talked at practice and said he's likely to play tomorrow. But like you said, playing is one thing, playing effectively, especially because he shot so well in the series. If that affects his jump shot, you got to think that that's a rough one. All right. Before we let you go, a couple minutes here on the home team. Chris Miles, NBA TV, of course, longtime NBC Sports Washington host as well, intimately familiar with the Wizards. With that said, how surprised are you that Tommy Shepard is no longer the general manager?
Not surprised at all. And look, I don't like to be the two-faced guy, right? Like, I've seen Tommy Shepard We shake hands. I like him. I think he made some really good, if not great, ancillary moves with like Daniel Gafford and like, getting Porzingis in the sense of when Porzingis seemed like he was damaged goods and he's not. Like he has a career year here in Washington. But I think if you're Ted and Zach Leonsis in that group and how much they love Rui Hachimura, right? And you watch him score 29 in the first round of playoffs for the Lakers and you gave him away for nothing, I think that's kind of like, and you're not even in the play-in, I think that's kind of like, all right, we got to do something completely different. I've been saying this for about 4 years now with this team. Like, it's time to just, like, destroy and rebuild it. I thought the John Wall trade was the beginning of that, and then they never really did it. I'm looking, and I've said this, and this is no disrespect to Bradley Beal, but I've said it for like 3 or 4 years now. Like, look, he was the piece to get you the things you need to do to rebuild and find your superstar. Now he's not that. Now he's kind of like this exorbitant contract that some teams might want, some teams won't want. I mean, you said Kawhi at 48. Brad's going to be, at the end of that contract, I think it's $53 million for his final year. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a lot for a lot of teams to take on. So I think the Wizards need to look at this roster, look at what else is happening, and try to figure out how they can get a star or a superstar on this team who can lead them to victory on most nights. I
totally agree with you. Beal next year, 46. Kawhi 1 for 1. We'll take him off your hands, LA. You can have Brad. Who says no?
I mean, if you're going to have a part-time player, right? You know what I mean?
Sign me up. Even if just for the contract. I don't care if Kawhi doesn't play next year. You get out of the Beal deal. But that's the thing, too, Chris, is like...
How many games did Kawhi play this season? Kawhi was excellent. I think Brad
awesome.
Played 50 games. I think Brad played 50.
Stats. It's almost like I sit in front of a computer when I do this.
Yeah, I feel like he was close to that. Once December, January, February, he played a lot.
Yeah, 52 this year.
So think about that. Think about this. What we say about Kawhi, he played more games than Bradley Beal this year.
Crazy. That's nuts. They actually weren't that far apart in averages either. Kawhi, quote unquote, only averaged 23, which is a little more than Brad did this year, but he's just so efficient.
Hold on. Remember,
and
Kawhi
obviously,
started off.
Well, I was gonna say
Kawhi
also
started off on those minutes restriction,
right? And then the defensive end is where it gets not even close.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Kawhi's numbers are skewed because in November and December when they were ramping him up, he was averaging like 8 or 9 points a game. So even at 23, you got to understand in like January, February, March, it's more like 30. Okay, so exactly the point when we talk about Brad's contract and what you expect to get from it. The baseline is kind of like Kawhi Leonard. So that's kind of been my discussion of like, well, Brad's a really good basketball player. He's not that. And if you're not going to get that kind of production, you kind of need that if you're going to have that contract. So that's always been my thing. Not a knock on Brad. I'm happy he's paid. But in that sense, if you want to be a winning team, that's a losing formula.
No doubt. What do you think they could realistically get for him? Like, can they get Tyrese Maxey from Philly? Would Philly be willing to do that? Like a Maxey and Tobias Harris?
No. So here's the thing. That time to me has passed. So Brad's contract, when he was making less money than Otto Porter, you could have gotten like 6 first-round picks and a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander before he blew up. Like you do realize that's what you could have gotten for Brad.
100%. I wish they had realized that.
I was saying that on when I was on the radio in DC. I kept saying that, like, look, I love Brad. I know he's second in the league in scoring, but this is what you can get for him to rebuild your team. Now, what you could probably get, like you said, and I think Tobias has one more year in his deal, I believe.
He does. Next year he's expiring.
You can get like an expiring Tobias Harris contract, maybe 2 first-round picks, depending on the team, or something like a Tobias Harris contract from another team. Like,
if you tell me I can have Tobias Harris and 2 first, I am signing that so fast. I'm scared they're gonna have to give up a pick, Chris.
So what the team I would call, if I had the job as the Wizards GM, which we all do that, right? Call the Orlando Magic immediately. Hey, you guys need a consistent veteran leading scorer. Bradley Beal can provide that for you. I see you're on the cusp of coming up. We're looking to rebuild. You have cap space. Look, we'll take that terrible Jonathan Isaac contract off of your hands. Give us a couple of firsts. See what they say. That's
Done.
exactly what I'm doing immediately.
Done. But the only problem is, of course, Brad has to want to go to Orlando. NBA players do oddly love Orlando, though.
Yeah, I mean, the team I've been told for Bradley Beal for years now is the Miami Heat. So
Right.
I've been waiting for 4 years for that to happen. And it happened.
Lowry and Hero for Beal. Who says no?
Ooh,
Do we just do
I
it?
think it's a good team for. I think it's a good deal for both sides. I think that's a good deal for both sides.
Excellent. Okay, can't wait for that to happen this summer. Please sign me up so fast. Last thing, like a minute or less, real quick. Tim Connolly's the name that keeps coming up. Do you think he's the guy, or is there someone else you have your eye on to be the new lead executive in Washington?
You know, I loved Tim Connolly before he went and traded the future for Rudy Gobert. Okay.
You and everybody else.
It's soured on me, man. I'm like, what? This was the guy? I don't think so. I mean, that is kind of like, you know, someone does something and that's their reputation.
Yes.
For Tim Connolly right now, it's trading the farm for Rudy Gobert. That's what it is. That's his big move. That's probably why he would be available in the first place. I think before he went to Minnesota, I'd have been like, yes, absolutely. But after this move to Minnesota, I don't know. I think they need to go with someone, you know, a new, fresh mind, someone that you and I might not even know about, that's in the front office, some assistant GM somewhere, you know, that you see a team on the uptick, maybe someone in OKC we don't know about,
Right.
Maybe someone in Orlando, like somebody that's with a team that's making all the right moves, you know, and making the right decisions. They need to go get that guy, the second guy in command there.
No doubt. Another name that I saw, just not like connected, just like, hey, this guy's one to keep an eye on because it's a possibility. Travis Schenck, who was the GM in Atlanta before they had a weird ownership like blowout. There's the whole Atlanta situation's wacky. But he was the assistant GM in Golden State when they built that thing up. He's another one that I think is interesting, but we shall see. Chris Miles, you can watch him. NBA TV, got all your post-game coverage. They do a bunch of great stuff. It's also great, like, if you flip on NBA TV in the morning, if you're like me and you can't stay up for the games at night, Chris and them are on replay. Chris is probably sleeping sometimes while I'm watching him on television. Chris, always appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on, and we'll definitely have you back later in the playoffs.
All right, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Chris Miles, everybody with us here on the Team 980. When we get back, Anthony, what are we doing when we get back? I honest to God don't remember. What are we doing when we get back? You know, you could do that before you turn on your mic.
Sorry.
How long have you worked in radio?
Going on 4.5.
Oh, that explains it. That's something you learn in year 5 is to not clear your throat before you go on the mic.
Yeah. But we're about to get into the Wiz versus other NBA.
Oh, right.
teams
How other NBA playoff teams were built, and then
Yep.
and then we'll see if we can model the Wizards after them. All right, so we'll do that when we get back, and Anthony will never clear his throat into the microphone again. It's the Hoffman Show, the Team 980, and always live on the free Odyssey app.
You can listen to the Team 980 on your smart speaker.
the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Also streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. Super producer Anthony Haney. Do you think we can get through all 10 playoff/play-in teams and how they built their rosters and compare them to the Wizards in the next 10 minutes before we have to break?
Sometimes you're forced to do the impossible, and I think this is one of those things where we have to do the impossible.
I think we can do it. I actually don't even think it's impossible because some of these are going to be a little bit repeat, right? We can kind of divide these into groups, and then we can talk about how feasible it is for the Wizards to build that way. Because what we want to do is we're going to take the teams that made the NBA playoffs/play-in and say, okay, how'd you build your team? Are you ascending? Are you on a team on the way out? Did you just kind of get lucky because now over half the team makes the league, or half the league makes the playoffs, and we're not really that interested in building what you've built? Looking at you, Chicago Bulls. But let's go through it real quick. All right, Bucks, Celtics, Sixers. Those are the top three teams in the East, and they all actually kind of built themselves in similar ways. I would say the Celtics and Sixers are more similar, and then the Bucks get a little bit lucky, right? The Bucks is the best way to do it if you possibly can. The Milwaukee Bucks drafted the greatest player on the planet currently at the 15th overall pick. If you can do that, you should. So if the Wizards somehow in this draft, where Victor Wembanyama is thought to be the generational player, either win the lottery and they draft the generational player at 1, or somehow wind up getting the guy who turns out to be the best player on the planet later in the draft, Anthony, I think that's a good plan. Draft the best player on the planet who just needs about 5 or 6 years to develop, and then he's leading you to a championship. Where do I sign?
I wish I knew.
Yeah, so does everybody else that's not the Bucks. So that's obviously the best plan. But what else do? They drafted very well with Chris Middleton, and they accumulated enough assets to be the team that was able to go get Drew Holiday. And that's where I think the Wizards can certainly look at how do we become that team? How do we sell? And this is why I wanted to trade Kuzma at the deadline. It's why they should have traded Beal years ago. Is you look at a team like Brooklyn, right? Going down and skipping a little bit. Brooklyn obviously got to the playoffs because they had KD and Kyrie Irving, right? But they now have Mikal Bridges. They also have a bleep ton of draft picks. So if they want to be the next team to go get someone, let's say Tyrese Halliburton's like, the Pacers, I hate it here. Playing in Indianapolis stinks. And they want to go after Tyrese Halliburton. They can, without blinking, offer 2 to 3 first-round picks to Indiana for it. It wouldn't even hurt them. Like, that's where they're at from a draft capital standpoint, right? Team like Oklahoma City, if they want to go get someone to pair with Shea, they have so many picks from the Clippers. And by the way, some of those picks might be pretty freaking good because Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are about to be gone. At the very least, Kawhi Leonard probably after next year because, as mentioned in the previous segment, he has a $48 million player option. So that's what the Wizards need to be thinking is they're a team that has for years given up first-round draft picks to acquire players for short term. That was the Ernie Grunfeld model. And they have for years neglected trading good but not great assets for potentially great returns. That's the miss. I think that's the model they need to look at is not only can we get a young guy in a trade for Beal that's appealing, but can we get other pieces that either we can use in the draft or that we can trade to get the guy that we want. And that's like where a team like Brooklyn sits. That's where a team like Cleveland built it. They drafted really well with young guys, and then they had the assets to go get Donovan Mitchell. New York, they went kind of a cap space route. That's the one that the Wizards are unfortunately probably going to have to do. That one's really hard. They also got lucky with the Julius Randle deal, that he wound up being way better than a lot of people anticipated, especially after he had that injury with the Lakers. Boston and Philly, they were bad or had teams' picks that were bad. They built it basically completely through the draft and then some smart trades with those assets. I don't think the Wizards have the assets to do it that way. Like, that's the problem, man, is like, what do the Wizards have to trade to other teams? They had Kyle Kuzma. He's an unrestricted free agent now. They have Porzingis, but he could just opt out. He could do the Wizards a solid and opt in and go somewhere and agree to a trade. Obviously, Beal, but I love what Chris said with Orlando. Like, hey, we'll take back this abomination of a Jonathan Isaac contract if you'll give us a pick or give us one of your young guys. But if I'm Orlando, I don't want that. I'm just going to build around Paolo Banchero. I don't really want Brad Beal taking Paolo Banchero's shots or Cole Anthony's shots.
It's that, Bradley Beal, I guess, if he was to go to Orlando, I think he will also just consume so much of their cap space. I think that's also what a lot of teams have to contend with right now, whether or not you want to take on a guy who's going to be paid like a top 5 player soon, and he's not, putting out top 5 player products. So, again, like you said, we put ourselves in this situation by not being able to get rid of some of these assets to acquire other assets. And, with Tommy Gomes, it's going to be interesting to see what we do moving forward. But if I was the GM, if they hired me, first thing I'm trying to do is definitely try to get rid of one of these pieces. I don't know which piece, but
I do. It's Brad. I'm sorry. It's just he's the one that is preventative from you doing other things.
But doesn't he also have a no trade clause?
Well, he does. And it doesn't stop me from trying.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the Isaac contract is actually not that bad for Orlando. I just looked it up. It's only partially guaranteed for this year, so they could probably cut him and not take a monster cap hit. And then his 2024-25 season is not guaranteed. So, if you're Orlando, unless you really, really want Bradley Beal, which is possible, they've been known to go star hunting in the past. I don't know that that's a huge deterrent. Why would you take on 4 years of Beal when you have only got 2 years that's a third of the price for Isaac, and you can actually cut him this season and not be in that bad of a cap situation? The crazy thing with Orlando is they've got the space to take on a contract like Beal because Isaac's their highest paid guy, him and Markelle Fultz. What? That's how young that team is. But are they gonna give up a Jalen Suggs, a Cole Anthony, a Franz Wagner? No, if I'm them, I just build around those dudes. They're all drafted rookie scale guys. Now, if one of them, Cole Anthony, has got to be getting close to extension time, right? Mm-hmm. And so if it's we're gonna have to give him an extension, he's got club options for this is his last year. And then he's got a qualifying offer, a restricted free agency next year. And if you're we're going to have to – there's no way we can keep him in the long term, and you're Washington, do you take back a player like that? Absolutely. But, even then, does Orlando have enough salary to send back to make the deal work?
Exactly.
There's so many rules around how these trades work, I just don't know. And then on top of it all, like you were saying, does Brad even want to go there? As for other teams in the East, and then we'll get to the West with some similar stuff, the Hawks, they drafted Trae Young. That's why they're in the playoffs. Yeah, draft a great player. Cool. The Heat, they've been able to do the middle build thing better than anybody, but they also did it because they drafted extremely well. Part of the reason Jimmy Butler wants to go there is because Bam Adebayo is great, although he's not having the best of series right now. Tyler Hero, good player. They've drafted generally pretty good, and then when a player kind of gets to the end of their run in Miami, they trade him, they get someone else, or they're able to create cap space and bring in Jimmy Butlers. But you can't do that if you're DC because people don't want to come here they want to go to Miami, which, by the way, is why Brad might want to go to Miami. Bulls, not interested. Raptors have drafted well. They're in a weird spot. We don't need to talk about them. In the Western Conference, Denver, they drafted a Hall of Famer in the 20s. Done. But the other thing that Denver did, I will say this. They drafted Michael Porter Jr. when a lot of teams were nah, we're out on that dude. They took a huge risk. Plenty of those types of guys have busted over the years. But it has paid off for them in a major way. MPJ, major injury concerns coming out of Mizzou, barely played there. But he was the number one recruit in the country. And if you can find guys like that who didn't work in college in their 1 year for whatever reason, or there's a little bit of a risk, but they're super high upside, I think that's the kind of swing that the Wizards have not taken that they absolutely should have taken multiple times over the last couple of years. Grizzlies obviously drafted really high. They got Ja. The Kings, they made a good trade. They did the thing the Wizards weren't willing to do. They traded a really good young player in Tyrese Halliburton for another really good young player in Domas Sabonis, and that's worked out for them. In a pairing with De'Aaron Fox, it's kind of unlocked Fox, and they also did a bunch of other smart stuff around. Suns, different category. They got Booker, although he was drafted later than a lot of the Wizards' recent draft picks. Clippers, obviously free agency. Warriors no one's ever built it like the Warriors. Lakers, they signed LeBron James. Timberwolves, they're in a weird spot, but it started with Karl Anthony Towns getting the number 1 overall pick, helpful. Oklahoma City, obviously that's the most ideal model. If you can have your assets traded at the right time, they got a ton for Russ. They got a ton for PG, including Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And that's the sliding doors moment for the Wizards is not trading Beal 2 years ago when they literally could have probably gotten almost exactly what the Clippers gave up for Kawhi. Or for PG. So they could also sign Kawhi. That's how hot Brad Beal's stock was, and they passed on that. You could have been OKC. You just needed to move 3 years ago. And now you're in this scenario. Yikes, Teddy. Yikes. All right, when we get back, it is time for Not My Beat, and we're going to head to Milwaukee. Day's top story. The biggest question, what is it? Is it the Aaron Rodgers story or the Bucks being down 3-1? We'll talk about them both with an expert next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app.
The Team 980 is always live on the free Odyssey.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Greg Matzik is the sports director at WTMJ in Milwaukee. And Greg, Destination Milwaukee is clearly our top story and all, but I don't actually know what the top story is. Is it the fact that the Bucks are down 3-1? Is it the Aaron Rodgers trade? Or is it whatever I did when I Googled to make sure I had your title right and it's something to do with you having hair all of a sudden?
Yeah, right. Yeah, worlds are colliding here, I think, is what we found out. Yeah, boy, it was really, really strange to watch the game last night while doing a radio program on Aaron Rodgers being traded and talking about a fair compensation plan, and then seeing the Bucks cough up a 15-point lead in the fourth quarter, and Jimmy Butler just scored again, by the way. It's been kind of a mess of a series aside of one game in which the Bucks connected on 25 threes. So if you have to have a record-setting night to beat the Miami Heat as a number one seed, I am worried. And the Bucks can do it. Sure, they can win three in a row, no doubt, but they really haven't given you much indication throughout the course of the series that they're ready to do that at this moment.
And just to clean up the loose end here, what's the deal with why when I Google you, the first result is, do you want to see Greg Matzik with hair?
Okay, so, all right, I am playing a 100 holes of golf on Thursday morning and afternoon and night, I guess.
Rough gig.
Yeah, all day. It's for a charity. There's a local charity in Wisconsin called the MAC Fund, which raises money for pediatric cancer and the fight against it. All the money raised stays in Wisconsin and fights pediatric cancer research, something I'm big time behind. It's a great organization.
That's cool.
Started by a guy named John McLaughlin, who was one of the original members of the Milwaukee Bucks. So we're trying to raise $7,500, and if I get to my threshold, then I'll try and grow my hair back for a month, or at least a month. And I haven't had hair in over 20 years. So my wife and kids have never seen me with hair, and I'd be willing to bet that most people in our listening audience have never seen me with hair.
That's incredible. By the way, if any of our listeners just so happen to want to donate to help fight pediatric cancer and, now are invested in this hair thing, is there? I didn't plan on doing this, but I'm now glad I asked. Where can they go help, and then we'll get to the sports questions?
Yeah, no doubt, man. No, I really appreciate that. So, yeah, we set up just a simple text keyword line. So if you text the word golf, just simple, 4 letters, the word golf to 855-616-1620. That's 855-616-1620. Text the word golf, and then my landing page gets sent right to your smartphone. And, hey, if you're able to donate $5, $10, you want to see me with hair, or more importantly, want to help out the fight against pediatric cancer, boy, that'd be amazing. Listeners from all over the country, who knows where we get our donors from, but we're certainly appreciative. I
love it. That's awesome. All right, Greg Matzik is our guest. He is the host, our afternoon host and sports director at WTMJ in Milwaukee. So let's start with the Bucks. As you said, very concerned, as anyone would be, down 3-1, even when you are the number one seed. And I think the thing that's so stunning to me, Greg, is the Bucks are a team that has made their hay over this nice run they've had the last couple of years, including the title, by being so good defensively. Drew Holiday seems to be a solution to any offensive anything that another team can throw at them. So why has Jimmy Butler been able to evade that, and especially, of course, last night?
No, I think one of the reasons the Bucks found success against the Heat the last time they played in the playoffs, which was a 4-game sweep by the Bucks a couple of years ago, Giannis spent a lot of time guarding Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy and Bam Adebayo just didn't really get off in that series. They had a decent first game. It went to overtime. Yeah, the rest of the games in that series were blowout wins by the Bucks. So immediately when this series started, I always pay attention to matchups, first sub off the bench, whatever teams are doing to try and lock down another player's best. And it was Drew Holiday and Jimmy Butler. It's not to say Drew can't guard Jimmy Butler, but you want to throw different bodies at him. I think that's how the Bucks found success. I was a little surprised Giannis didn't guard Jimmy in Game 1. But again, Giannis played just 10 minutes and then was out for Game 2 and 3. So now you're reliant in the non-Drew minutes of having the likes of Chris Middleton try and guard Jimmy Butler. That's just not going to happen. So now with Giannis coming back, yeah, you get a taste of Giannis on Butler, but not much. Last night it was a little more Drew, who's got an offensive load to carry as well. Tough to do it on both ends. And they've just found no success. And Butler's hitting contested shots. He's hitting open shots. He's hitting every shot. It really hasn't mattered much who is on him. But certainly Giannis, with Butler in the lane, is a different presence than just about anybody else on the Bucks. So if the Bucks want to save this series, they're going to have to put their best player on the Heat's best player. That's the only way that can control him.
How healthy do you feel like Giannis is, and that would help answer how up he is or not to that task?
Yeah, I was watching him pretty close last night, and I know he had the massage gun on him on the bench when he went to the sidelines. He was doing everything possible just to keep that back from locking up and trying to keep it warm, which you might expect. It's not uncommon in the NBA to wear a heat belt or have the massage gun on you. He didn't look to me like a guy who was too bothered by it. Easy for me to say, and this morning might be a totally different situation. Was not at the Bucks shoot-around this morning. In fact, I don't think they had one this morning, so we'll get a better indication tomorrow how he made it through. Once you're kind of up and going, and especially in the mindset of Giannis, like I don't think anything's really going to slow him down. He's going to put max effort on the floor. He didn't look to me like a guy who was really too concerned about what his back was able to do. He looked like Giannis to me, and I thought he played a pretty brilliant game. So, again, today's a different story. I'm sure he'll receive plenty of treatment. Tomorrow's shoot-around, hopefully he's recovered. But he has to spend time on Jimmy Butler. I am not worried about Bam Adebayo beating the Bucks and, closing out this series. I'm just not. And between he and Brook Lopez, the best defenders on the team, big or small, they've got to find a way to shut down what has become a potent offense here for the Heat after kind of a mess of a regular season.
Yeah, it is. That is one of the weird quirks. It's like Duncan Robinson is all of a sudden not only hitting threes, but in order to hit them, he's got to play. He didn't play most of the regular season. All of a sudden, he's alive from the dead. Giannis, by the way, last night for the audience who might not have seen the final numbers, 26, 13, and 10. So in 38 minutes. So it's certainly not his fault that the Bucks went down. Last thing I'll ask you about this before we switch over to Rodgers is, do you feel like they missed some of the depth pieces that they had? A guy like Dante DiVincenzo, who's playing big minutes for Golden State, has been a big part of what they do the last couple of years. And, they trade for Crowder at the deadline. He doesn't play last night. A guy like Goran Dragic doesn't play last night. Do you think they have the bench depth that has helped them in the playoffs in past years and given them some more options if they run into an opponent that they can't solve with their starters?
Yeah, I'm always curious to see in a playoff series how much tighter the rotation gets. And when I was looking at the Bucks' potential rotation, guys who played meaningful minutes in the regular season, I thought they could probably go 10 deep, and that might mean Wesley Matthews doesn't even play at all. Now, it turns out Wesley Matthews got the minutes in Game 1 trying to guard Jimmy Butler, Marquette on Marquette for those in the Wisconsin area or who understand where Marquette is. And Pat Connaughton was out of the rotation, which I thought was a little surprising. It wasn't a great year for Pat. But playoff Pat is kind of a thing we've noticed with the Bucks. I always think they miss athletic wings and good rebounding guards. But I think they have it with Connaughton. I think they have it with Holiday. Matthews now injured, is out of the rotation. Crowder's been kind of a mess, if I'm being honest, since he arrived. And maybe predictable given his elevated age. He didn't play much throughout the regular season. Had some moments, but in this series specifically, there's not much of a role for him. Now, that could change in the Boston Celtics series should the Bucks advance and Boston advances in their pick-and-pop world. Goran Dragic was more of a, hey, it doesn't cost anything to pick him up. He's got some playoff experience. If Drew goes down, we don't have to rely solely on Javon Carter. So I do think there's pretty good depth, and I think that depth was on display the game the Bucks won without Giannis. But there are some liabilities also on defense. Joe Ingles has been kind of a liability. Crowder couldn't hang with Butler in his limited opportunities early in the season or in the series. Wesley Matthews really struggled with Butler. Then he got injured. I still think it is a pretty deep team. They can absorb a loss of a player more so, I think, than a team like the Heat. But you wouldn't know that watching the Heat play the last couple of games. They surprisingly don't miss Tyler Hero near as much as I would have thought.
Yeah, you and the entire NBA universe singing that after Game 1, and here we are with the Heat somehow up 3-1. Greg Matzik, WTMJ in Milwaukee with us here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. So the other big story, obviously, in your neck of the woods is the Aaron Rodgers trade. 18 seasons for Rodgers in Green Bay. I can speculate on kind of what the emotions are of Packers fans from here, but I could also just ask you to tell us, what is the kind of reaction now that this thing has finally been completed?
Yeah, so it was kind of a deadline week is kind of what we thought here in Wisconsin, that leading up to the draft, maybe on draft day, we would learn the compensation package. It never felt to me like it was going to be the Jets are on the clock and all of a sudden the commissioner says, well, we have a trade. Like, I didn't think it was going to play out that way. But just, take your pick of the day you thought it was going to happen. Even the morning or as the draft coverage was beginning, I thought that was all in play. But I did think the draft was a legitimate deadline. I like what the Packers got in return. We'll start with that. Moving up in the first round, a couple of picks, great. The conditional pick I think is most interesting to me, Craig. I would have thought the conditional pick would have been tied to Rodgers' future in New York beyond this coming season, but it's really not. In fact, it's not even tied to his performance. If he plays 65% of the snaps, the 2024 second-round pick becomes a first. So nothing about 4,000 yards, touchdowns, right? I mean, MVP vote, nothing about that. Just 65% of the snaps. So to me, that's a bit of a win in the deal. Nothing about Rodgers in 2025 was included. Another surprise to me is that Rodgers is the only existing player in the NFL in the deal. I thought maybe there would be an existing piece from the Jets that would come back to Green Bay. Who knows? It could have been discussed, but it was not as part of the plan. The timing of it I thought was interesting. Adam Schefter broke the news about 4:20 your time yesterday, and at 4:30 your time yesterday, Packers GM Brian Gutekunst addressed the media for a planned pre-draft press conference. You can't tell me somebody from Green Bay didn't leak the information to Schefter just before Brian Gutekunst came to the podium and was able to talk about it, right? I mean, there was no ambiguity, and Brian Gutekunst didn't really shut down any of the thoughts or the reported trade speculation. No, it was Brian Gutekunst basically said it's a done deal. We got a couple of days to get through it. There's some things that have to happen, but he did not discount any of Schefter's reporting. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that
As
is.
for,
Yeah.
Didn't you strike the timing of it, right? I mean, to me, that stood out.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that that he had the 4:30 presser. As someone who covered Washington on the beat for a number of years, and we used to always get news 10 minutes after the presser. What a time that is to actually be able to ask about it. And that's super interesting. Also, that he didn't deny it. So often these things are on hold until they're official, no comment, that kind of thing. I also, by the way, Greg, just to kind of go a little deeper on this, I also thought it was fascinating that the conditional pick is the 2024 pick. And even if you wind up just getting a second, the fact that you get 2 seconds for a guy that was never going to play for you again, I also agree. Like, it's not too much to give up for the Jets because they get a guy who was the MVP of the league 2 years ago. But also the Packers get a ton of cap relief and, a decent slew of picks. By the way, getting the second in this year's draft is huge considering kind of the contour of talent in this draft. I think it's a great deal, a deal I would say that makes sense for both sides. And I guess in a question form, though, does any of that matter to Packers fans, or is it just people who are upset that Aaron Rodgers is gone or are excited that he's gone because of all of the hullabaloo he's caused the last couple of years?
Yeah, so public sentiment has really shifted on this one. We had the same discussion a year ago, and a trade was in the works with the Broncos. I think Packers fans would have been largely disappointed, and that may have something to do with back-to-back MVP seasons, right? I think you're willing to put whatever sort of off-field drama or however Aaron chooses to undermine his coaching staff or the brass of the Packers or whatever he wants to do in the dark, whatever you got annoyed with by Aaron Rodgers, you are willing to put aside because he was an MVP quarterback back-to-back seasons and a 4-time MVP and still playing at a high level. Well, the intersection of Rodgers' bizarre off-field things that he does under the guise of leadership, blowing up teammates, along with subpar play, his worst really statistical season since he became a starter in the NFL, I think that's when fan sentiment started to sour. They were not willing to put up, by and large, with all of it. And the way that I looked at it too, Craig, is $60 million is a lot of money to go 8-9, right? I mean, that is a lot of money. $60 million is a lot of money for a guy who barely averaged over 205 yards passing the final 5 games of the regular season. And in a home playoff game, de facto playoff game against the Lions, the final week of the regular season, he got outperformed by Jared Goff. And with a chance to win that game late, he threw a pick. Aaron Rodgers' last pass as a member of the Packers was intercepted in a game they had to win. So I think for me that really stood out. Performance doesn't really match up with what he's being paid or was going to be paid, and the fact that he got the biggest contract in Packers history and then totally took a dump on the offseason program was a slap in the face of the general manager. So that's my stance on it. I am celebratory of his career in Green Bay because it's been nothing short of amazing, but I'm simultaneously ready to move on because the juice is no longer worth the squeeze.
Totally makes sense to me. It's how I would feel if I was up there as well. Greg, I'm so glad we had you on. I'm so glad that I Googled to double-check your job title beforehand and found the incredible charitable thing that involves you all of a sudden having hair. Greg Matzik with us from WTMJ in Milwaukee. Always great to chat, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, man, you bet. Anytime.
Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And it is time for a Take Command Tuesday. Anthony, I can't believe that it's only Tuesday. Like, I feel this happens to me at what feels like every single week. Like it's Monday, Tuesday, and it's like, wow, this week is so long. Then I wake up and it's Thursday, and I'm like, what happened to the week? Where did it all go?
I mean, once you get past the first 2 days, I think the rest of the week goes by pretty fast.
It's all downhill?
Yep, pretty much. That's how I like to think of it anyway.
How's
But I
that?
think really Monday is like really everybody's Wednesday for me, I think.
You're going to have to explain that one.
Just because like once you get over a hump day, which people like to, say is Wednesday,
Yeah.
the weekend is basically it. I think once I get past Monday, once I'm over, the weekend and I've gotten back into the swing of things and I get through Monday, I think that's when things start to, turn up for me.
I feel like Tuesday is that day for me. Tuesday's the hump.
Yeah.
What you were trying to say is not that Monday is actually Wednesday or
Yeah.
Wednesday is Monday. I don't remember which one you said. Neither of them make any sense. But what you're trying to say is that they've misnicknamed Hump Day.
Yes.
Got it.
Thank you for getting to the bottom of that, Craig.
I had to. I was lost. And if I was lost, and I know you as well as anyone, then everyone else had to be lost too.
Yep.
Get Z on the phone and tell him what you just said and see. I'm trying to think, who else are your best friends? Get Z, get anyone else in your group chat on the phone and see if that makes any sense to any of them. Because
I
I'm going to
got
bet
you.
the answer is no. Okay. Anyway, Take Command. We actually had a really cool podcast on that came out this morning. We're going to do our last and final mock draft that'll come out Thursday morning before the draft. But we went through a bunch of scenarios that we're not going to play for you right now. You have to check out the podcast for that. We also went a little deeper on the CJ Stroud S2 stuff. But the part we're going to play for you right now is taking a look at answering a very simple question. What makes a Washington Commander? Logan did a little research into some of the recent draft picks for the Commanders and kind of found some patterns based off position. So here is what he found. Take Command Tuesday here on the Hoffman Show. You did it. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. All right. So the Commanders drafting at 16. They've got 47. They've got a bunch of other picks as we go on down. And, no real reason in listing them all, Logan, because there's a great chance that at least one of them gets traded. But they got picks in every round. They're set up well with the way this draft is. And we're going to actually get to some simulations of what decisions they could be making on the board in the first 3 rounds in a few minutes. But you did an interesting kind of study research project over this past week where you took a look at Rivera and his crew, the Martys, et cetera, and kind of what they've looked for at different positions, because there's all these names that get connected to every team, but to Washington. And it becomes kind of the general consensus, like, oh, well, Washington's going to take this guy because he's the Washington guy. Well, when you dug in, let's start with offensive line. What is an actual Washington guy? What is an actual commander based off history at the offensive line?
Well, I think Ron is a guy who's going to follow things that have worked for him in the past. And so when I look at last year's draft, I think last year's draft was very successful. And I think it was very successful in Ron's mind and, in my observation of last year's draft class, because they went and they got players who were very high character guys who'd played a lot of football for big programs. And there's the character thing, I think, is something that increases the floor of a player. So basically what you're looking at is very, very high floor players and players who don't necessarily have the same type of upside. So when you go through the draft class, let me just click this open real quick. But when you go through the draft class with these guys, you kind of say to yourself, what are you looking for? I'm looking for guys with leadership qualities. I'm looking for guys that have position flex. I'm looking for guys that have played a ton of football. So the first guy on my list that kind of meets this criteria is Paris Johnson. He started Paris Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State. He started as a freshman, played guard, started at left tackle. So the position flex box is checked. He started at charity in high school. Obviously he's very forward thinking and he's got his head on straight. So I think that is a guy that kind of fits that mold, right? The next guy on my list is Anton Harrison, because he's played a lot of football, been a little inconsistent, but has the position flex. And then the guy that probably is the most Commanders player to me out of these tackles is Matthew Bergeron out of Syracuse. He's the team captain. He's a 4-year starter. He plays guard. He plays left tackle. He plays right tackle. He's done it all. He's been there his entire career. No trouble issues. And so to me, it's like, I know all these names, people throw around Darnell Wright. When you kind of delve into Darnell Wright a little bit more, you realize he was really inconsistent at left tackle. He was really inconsistent at guard. He has some there's whispers in certain media outlets of him having some personality type stuff, right? And I haven't been able to corroborate that, but from these outlets, like, I'm going to kind of defer to that, because where there's smoke, there's often fire. So this guy that I love the film of might not be a personality fit with this organization in the same way that a Matthew Bergeron is, because Matthew Bergeron, just based on this kind of little research project I did, has a very, very high floor. He's an excellent leader, voted captain. He speaks multiple languages. He's a smart guy. Position flex.
Those Syracuse Orange, you gotta love
right.
them.
And so again, so I know that's a name that hasn't really been associated with the team a ton, but I think that's really interesting, because it takes away the guys like DeJuan Jones, who are very, very high upside guys, but the floor is not very high for him, I don't think, because there are some, there's some conditioning, some concerns. He has played a lot of football, which I think kind of checks the bill, but lacks that true position flex. Some people say he can play left. Maybe, I think that's yet to be seen, but I think that's interesting. Broderick Jones, only 19 starts. He's only redshirt sophomore. I don't know if Ron, given the current situation, is going to bet on upside the way some of these other organizations are. So I think he's looking for more of a surefire thing. And when you go through the list, it's really interesting, because then you get to like guards, for example, and it's not Osiris Torrance, it's Steve Avila, it's Cody Mock, it's Tyler Steen from Alabama, right? Guys who have played 50-plus games, those super seniors, those guys who have seen everything under the sun. And again, those names have not been in tremendous circulation with this organization, but I think that's the type of guy you're probably going to lean towards.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do think the offensive line is in an interesting place, though, where, are you looking for someone who's going to start for you right now, or are you looking more long term? And you always wonder. But I do think the thing you said at the beginning, more generally about Ron, is like, Ron is someone who gets an idea in his head, and if he thinks it works, then he's going to go right back to that well, which can be good and can be bad. Sometimes, like, you're the benefit of an anomaly, and sometimes you found something that works, and you should keep going back to it. So I do think that's going to be an interesting thing with them in this particular draft at O-line is, we've talked about it, and I've said it on the radio, I've said it here, is like, yeah, offensive line makes a lot of sense, because you feel like you can upgrade at almost every position outside of whatever Cosme's going to play. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need any position. So how does the shuffle work? That's going to be a pretty fascinating thing. All right, corner.
Right.
Obviously, Benjamin St. Juste is probably the model, would be my guess. They love what they've gotten out of him. Big, long, physical, great feet. But he's obviously had an injury history, and I think he had some of that at Minnesota as well. So maybe a little bit more upside play. What'd you find in going back and looking at corners?
Yeah, so they do tend to kind of gravitate towards like physical freaks, and William Jackson III is kind of the other guy, in my opinion, that they went after, right? He's a big, physical, fast guy that is kind of freaky in his measurables. And I think like when they're looking for a certain athletic profile there and a certain physical mindset at the position, because Benjamin St. Juste maybe isn't the most physical guy of all time, but he's a very willing tackler. He's very good in press. He's good at the catch point. And so when you kind of go through, you say, okay, well, like, who is that? And guys who are very productive for a long time. Like, I think Benjamin St. Juste played, I think he was like a 3-year starter at Minnesota, if I remember correctly. I'd have to go back and look that up. But so guys like Deonte Banks, to me, because of his athletic profile, because of how he plays the position physically, kind of fit the mold here more than, a Witherspoon or a Porter. And then you say, well, who else kind of outside of that top group of guys? And I really want to say schematically, the guy from Mississippi State, Emmanuel Forbes, right? The corner, he would fit schematically because they play a lot of cover 3. They play a lot of off match, but they don't. I think the lack of big size there would be concerning. But I think from a scheme, from an athletic trait standpoint, he fits. And then a guy that I think everyone's been talking about, maybe they haven't been, is Julius Brents from Kansas State, because he is. I'm not even like this. He is Benjamin St. Juste. He's 6'3", he's 200 pounds, he's got 34-inch arms. He had excellent short shuttle times. His 40 was okay, but all of his his L drill, his 5.10.5 were all like top percentile, 100th percentile. They were excellent. So that's exactly what Benjamin St. Juste was. And so when you think about that, like if that's the model, if those guys with those high physical upsides are the model, then the list gets really tight really quick. Banks, I think there might be a little bit of concern because he played in a predominantly man scheme. I think William Jackson III, predominantly a man corner, maybe that scares him off. But the high physical upside, I think, is something you lead into. And then I think, Forbes with the cover 3 match, very, very interesting. And then Julius Brents, because that physical profile works so well in this system. So those are some names that I would just throw out there. And I think there's probably more guys that fit that bill, but those are the guys that kind of jumped off the page when I started the project.
Yeah. And that gets really interesting, and we'll get into kind of our decision-making mock draft simulator here in a few, but it does really, really push for like a trade down situation. Potentially with those guys like Brents and Forbes, and Banks, or you're looking like mid to late 20s versus 16. And that's
same thing with the O-line though too, right? If you're looking for a type, right, that trade back is going to be big.
Well, I mean, if you say Paris Johnson though, like
if he's there at 16, then
16
maybe
might be the guy. So you start to piece all this puzzle together. Any other positions that you came across strong correlations of traits and success with the Commanders?
Yeah, so there were. So we'll do edge rusher and linebacker if we got time to do that.
Yeah.
So linebacker, I think everyone thinks, like they need a Mike, they need Jack Campbell, they need this kind of prototype. He's the bluest collar, he's the highest floor. But when you look at what they do at linebacker, they tend to kind of gravitate towards athletic projects. Like obviously Jamin Davis is Exhibit A. Cody, the guy they just brought in from Seattle, is also a converted safety who's relatively green at the position. I think they seem to have a lot of confidence that they can develop those guys athletically, right? That they'll turn those athletic guys into starting caliber players. So to me, then if I'm looking for athletic profiles, I kind of get away from Jack Campbell. Like even though he's the highest floor guy. So it's funny, I feel like they have high floor standards in certain areas, and then here it's like they're playing upside. So Drew Sanders from Arkansas, the linebacker who's the converted edge rusher, because of his athletic profile, all of a sudden creeps up the board pretty substantially. Simmons I don't think Simmons kind of fits their mold because he's not very tall, but they like these tall, angular linebackers, right? There's a kid from Tulsa. He's 6'3". He's got the longest arms of any linebacker. Like those types of physical athletes that have like kind of this imposing figure at the linebacker position, I think become more valuable for them than, let's say, a guy like Jack Campbell. Now, I think Jack Campbell would be an excellent fit here, and I'm sure that if he's there in the third round, they'd probably select him. But I do think that it's important to note that their value at that position seems to be more on traits as opposed to on college production, which is something to keep in mind when evaluating like a Henley out of Washington State. Very productive player, but a little shorter, a little stouter. They want those tall 6'4", 6'5" guys, I think, that can run and hit. And I think there's some guys later that are maybe more raw, but fit that bill a little bit more acutely. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the last one you mentioned was edge rusher, which is one of the most interesting positions because it seems like based off their current roster, like you've got kind of two different molds, right? You've got the Montez Sweat mold, and then you've got the Chase Young mold. And Chase is maybe a bad example because there's no one else in his mold. He's such a freak. But like the bendy edge rusher type, ironically, Shakatoni, who they now need to replace because he got suspended for a year.
Yeah,
but that's kind of the two molds.
And I'm really glad you brought that up because there is two types of players they would be looking for. There's these guys that are big physical edge shedders. So like your Keon White is a perfect example from Georgia Tech. He's a little raw, but he's 6'5". He's got 34-inch arms. He's kind of that big, unicorn body type that's going to set edges in the run game, compress the pocket, just be big and nasty, right? And then you've got like Zach Harrison out of Ohio State. He's got 36-inch arms. He looks like Montez Sweat when he plays, and Montez Sweat's been so successful in this scheme. He's got high run-stopping upside, and again, you just paid those defensive tackles. So those types of bigger body, longer arms, Miles Murphy, Lucas Van Ness, those guys fit that mold, right? A guy like Zach Harrison at Ohio State makes me a little nervous because he's been an underachiever, and I think they want to shy away from guys like that, which is why I mentioned Keon White first if they don't pick one in the first 2 rounds and he slips a little bit, because he's a classic overachiever, so like you're kind of betting on high floor work ethic, which is something they did last year. Then you get into the bendy edge rushers and you say, how much do they actually value that in this scheme? Because the guys they kind of pick up in the later rounds are bendy edge rushers, and so, Will McDonald, the 4th out of Iowa State, is like the bendiest edge rusher you'll ever see. He's very experienced. He plays physically. He fills a need at a high level, but does he actually, will he fall to you in the 2nd round or 3rd round? I don't think so. I think he's going to be off the board. And so, like that's something to keep an eye on, is like, even though they have a very specific type, like, are they going to kind of prioritize, hey, we have these big bodies, let's get a smaller guy like Nick Hampton out of Appalachian State, who's 6'2.5", 6'3". He's 240-ish, 45 pounds maybe, but a very, very excellent pass rusher. So do you kind of say in a later round, we get a Nick Hampton to kind of flesh out this room where you say we want more of the same type of body types as our big freaky edge rushers? We got, your James Smith-Williams, your Montez Sweat, even Chase Young to a certain extent. So that's where I think that becomes really interesting, is there are 2 different types. And I think it's like they also seem to be gravitating towards guys there with high physical profiles, obviously, and also high work ethic profiles. So, other guy would be Fehoko out of Sacramento State, who is San Jose State, excuse me, who's, again, that big kind of edge setting guy who's going to compress a pocket. So there are guys that fit both molds, and it just depends on, which they want to prioritize, especially given Chase Young and his 5th-year option type of thing. So,
Yeah. They've got a massive decision to make at edge, and I do wonder if one of the premier edge guys falls to them a little bit at 16, if that becomes appealing. But
yeah,
they say they want to keep both guys, but we'll also see May 2nd's coming real fast for Ron Rivera to announce what they do. But the thing is, even if they announce they're not giving Chase the 5th-year option, doesn't mean they're not keeping him long term. It's going to depend on what happens this season. All right, when we get back here on Take Command, we dive into the mock draft simulator and we put ourselves on the clock, make some real decisions like the Commanders will have to do starting later this week. Sam Fortier going to join us coming up at the top of the hour. But take a quick break, come back, reset the show a little bit, get you a little bit more info on this breaking Nats story as well. Again, if you missed the breaking news earlier, the Nationals have won their court case over the Masson rights against the Orioles in terms of the price point. They haven't necessarily won the case in terms of being free from the entire agreement, but we will fill in those gaps next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app.
Here's what's trending on the Team 980.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Quick update on a story we've been following the last couple of weeks, and then we will get to Sam Fortier at the top of the hour. But the New York State Court of Appeals confirmed the fair market value of the Washington Nationals television rights Tuesday, a step that will help the team collect tens of millions of dollars in missing rights fees. That is the lead of the story in the Washington Post. Reading from Ben Strauss's reporting, and then we'll add context and commentary along the way. New York's highest court found that the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network, a.k.a. MASN, which is controlled by the Orioles, has no right to take the dispute over $100 million in missing rights fees payments from 2012 to 2016 to an independent arbitrator, as it had been seeking. The court did not compel payment of the money immediately, and the sides must continue negotiating over the amount to be paid to the Nationals. While it is unfortunate that our decision may send this protracted litigation into extra innings, the result is necessitated by the settlement agreement's terms. Commentary: I hate when legal people use sports analogies, especially involving sports cases. Just rule. Nobody needed the extra innings thing. You're all big dorks. That's fine. Your job, that you're very handsomely compensated for, is to be a dork. Just be a dork. Not that lawyers can't like sports, but using sports analogies in court cases makes you a dork. Still, according to a person familiar with the case, the ruling is likely to provide some clarity on the value of the Nationals' TV rights moving forward as the team continues to look for a buyer. MLB's Revenue Sharing Committee, the court ruled, is the appropriate venue to hear disputes over the case and will be more difficult to challenge its decision in the future, that person said. That means an MLB committee should have an easier time setting the value of the fees for other past years as well as for future years. Neither MASN nor the Nationals commented on the ruling. So, in short, we now know where this will be settled. The price itself will be determined by an MLB group, not an independent arbitrator, and there will not be any ruling immediately. However, the clarity should at least allow, and knowing that that money is coming, some amount, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially, at least $100 million, according to the story and kind of the way this is played out, is going to unlock some of the stalemate around this team. Now, obviously, the best thing that can happen for the Nationals is an agreement between them, Major League Baseball, and MASN to release the rights of the Nationals up for bid. Theoretically, NBC Sports Washington can then buy them as the most likely landing spot, and Ted Leonsis, who owns NBC Sports Washington, likely then pays up and buys the Nationals. And who knows what kind of repercussions that could have for his other teams, if he can actually truly afford to own 3 of the 4 biggest teams in town. Who knows? But he's already offered $2 billion for them. Part of the reason the learners don't want to do that is because they don't know the exact value of the team. Selling an asset when you don't know how much it's worth is silly, and so they didn't. And so what this should do is unlock some of that and help also, frankly, have the learners make a decision of whether or not they want to actually sell this team or whether they look at the market and go, it's not what it was when we put it on the market in terms of teams going left and right. The market has slowed. We're not that interested. We're going to keep going. And either way, clarity is good. Now, look, they can also look at Ted Leonsis and say, look, man, you just didn't offer enough, and neither did anybody else, and they could still be looking. But hopefully what this means is we are working towards clarity, and that, let's say, a year from now, as it's time to start really making moves and becoming competitive again, and the Nationals perhaps look to make, the kind of move they did with, what's his name? The guy, super grumpy, awesome player, Jason Worth. Their Jason Worth move of this rebuild, right? When the Nats signed Jason Worth the first time around to being good, they had some young prospects in the system. They knew they were a couple years away. They didn't really look like they should have been signing Jason Worth at that time, but they knew they needed a guy who had been around, had won games, and could be a clubhouse leader, not to mention a very good player for them. And Jason Worth was that for the better part of a decade. They could be in that position as soon as next summer. And having clarity on this, where the team knows its budget and where the team potentially has a path towards new ownership, I think is really, really vital. So a huge ruling today in order to resolve that more or less in the Nationals' favor. All right, when we get back, Sam Fortier joins us to talk about a whole bunch of NFL draft stuff. We go deep with Sam next on The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Final hour of the show, and it's our pleasure to welcome in from the Washington Post, Sam Fortier. Sam, what's up, bro?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Time to take the text chat to the radio. We were texting back and forth on all kinds of football stuff this weekend. I've actually fleshed out my thoughts. They're just not random bullets that are darts getting thrown at you. So I'm going to sound a lot more coherent, I think, here on the radio, which, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, low bar, but I'm ready.
So let's start with the thing that we were talking about first, which is the S2 test. So the S2 cognition test has gotten a lot of run basically the last 2 weeks. Your colleague Nikki Javala wrote about it earlier in the offseason. The Athletic has done a bunch of stories on it. And the initial story that got a lot of run was C.J. Stroud had a very poor score. That's now been contested by the folks at S2, or at least as much as they can without crossing the non-disclosure lines. But I think what they said was really important. And where I kind of fall on this is a really good score tells me something. A really bad score I'm willing to ignore if everything else doesn't match up, because you could be tired, you could be groggy, you could be whatever. You could just have a bad hour where you're not focused and locked in and score really poorly on this test that's supposed to measure decision making and things like that. In the same way that if you can't actually lift 300 pounds, you can't just go lift 300 pounds. I can't go score a 93 if I'm not capable of scoring a 93. That's kind of where I fall on it as being a fairly significant part of the evaluation. Where do you come down as someone who's also studied this, and you've been working on a lot of other metric stuff too that's way off the radar for most folks who are breaking down the draft?
Yeah, I think we should probably start with a definition of what this test is. The S2 cognition test, it's like 30, 45 minutes. You're sitting down at a computer and it's saying things like, click the blue square, but then like the word blue is in yellow. It's testing your reaction time. It's testing, sort of how you process things. And they believe, and they say, and the data shows that it translates to the field. And in my colleague Nikki's story, which was really good, people should go check it out. You had a couple GMs saying, yeah, there is value there. You wouldn't draft a guy based on that, but it is kind of a back check. And so if you have ever thought to yourself, oh, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, those guys scored really well on it, then you have to look at CJ Stroud's 18% and you got to say, like, is that a concern? And so I think, the danger here that we talked about is you don't want to treat it like we did the Wonderlic, where you make that an all-important metric. You start using that, you start overweighting it, and saying, oh, like this guy isn't smart, when maybe that's not exactly what he's showing. And you got to say, hey, like, how does this fit into our evaluation puzzle?
Right. And I think that, the biggest difference, obviously, as you well know, between the Wonderlic, which was an intelligence test, it was basically the test that we took in history class, versus this, which is a decision-making reactive test, is this actually translates to football. Like, I guess the Wonderlic kind of would tell you something about someone's study habits, but it might just tell you they need to study differently and they hadn't studied that material before. It doesn't actually tell you anything about how they will translate to learning an NFL playbook. This tells you, the example you use is great, right? If, the word blue is written in yellow typeface, like being able to differentiate whether you're actually supposed to be looking for the blue or the yellow is a similar enough skill to differentiating between cover 2, cover 3. What is that safety doing? Is that linebacker dropping because he's in this or that? And then also, what do you do with that information, right? Because that's something else that it measures, is kind of those if this, then that. And that is what quarterbacking is at its most fundamental level. It is what playing wide receiver is, where you have to bend routes. Playing safety is where you have to decide, like, okay, this is the route concept coming at me. And to me, it's no surprise that those three positions have done traditionally in the last 20 years that they've been doing this the best on that test, because it actually, to me, translates in a very real way.
So one of the most interesting components to this discussion to me is Bruce Feldman of The Athletic, the college football writer, wrote a great story over the weekend.
Had him on yesterday to talk about it. Oh yeah, let's go.
There you go. So, I texted a couple scouts that I know after that, because I wanted to see, Bruce wrote, for anyone who wasn't listening yesterday, that basically he talked to a scout. The thing that stood out to me most was one of the scouts that he talked to said, I did not see the trouble processing show up on his tape, which is really interesting because the S2 cognition test is implying he should have trouble with disguised coverages. He should, be a delayed processor, decision maker, things like that. But the scouts said the tape doesn't match that. And so that is to me like the crux of this whole thing. And that's the most interesting part because if you're the Texans or the Cardinals or not the Cardinals, but whomever is going to pick him, that's something that you need to vet. And I talked to a couple scouts that I know and they said, yeah, we saw that we did not see that processing either, the processing problems either. So that is going to put a GM in a fascinating position of this test is telling me that this guy might have more trouble. Maybe they weren't seeing a ton of disguised looks. Maybe they weren't seeing a ton of rolls or things like that. And so you have to decide as a GM, how worried am I about this and can he overcome it? And I think the other point, if I can keep rambling, that one of the scouts brought up to me was
go right ahead.
Their biggest problem was like his receiving core that CJ Stroud had.
It's nuts.
Is the best receiving core he will ever work with, bar none. Marvin Harrison Jr., JSN, Chris Olave last year.
Right. Like just to be clear, if they imported that receiving class to the NFL, that is the best NFL receiving class he will ever face or ever work with, and he got to do it against Big Ten defenses.
Right. And if your concern with him is, maybe he doesn't create, off script like these other quarterbacks do, if that's one of the weaknesses of his game and then he has to make every throw, from the pocket, if he has to do that and you don't have as good a receiving core, okay, then that's a problem that translates to the NFL. And, how does that factor in with S2? I think those are all components that we're talking about here.
Sam Fortier, Washington Post with us. So 2 things on the back of that. One thing that was in Bruce's story that was also super interesting is one of the scouts, and I think it was a quarterback's coach, was like, I wish I had seen that secondary playmaking like I did in the Georgia game more often. But part of the problem and the difficulty of evaluating him is he never had to do that because the receivers were open all the time because he had like 3 first-round NFL dudes running around like crazy against anyone not named Devin Witherspoon. So you have that, but also to show you just how subjective scouting is, Logan watched Stroud's tape and he's like, yeah, I see it. I see the delays. So, you have 2 scouts looking at the same and like very good ones who can look at the same exact tape and see 2 completely different things.
I think like that's the thing that a lot of people don't appreciate. And I did not appreciate before I started covering the league, how disparate the thoughts are that scouts have on not just like prospect to prospect, but like scheme to scheme, system, like everybody has very different thoughts on players in general, specific parts of their games and how they'll translate to certain parts of the NFL, depending on what team they get, even, character. It is really like when you start seeing like tweets or reports that's like so-and-so is flying up draft boards or sinking down draft boards. It's, you really got to think to yourself like, okay, NFL teams, when they get their guys together, like when they get their scouts together, they're going to have 20 different thoughts in that personnel evaluation room.
Right.
Like, and I know that obviously they're setting the boards probably right now or in the next couple of days, but like, it's really hard to get a gauge on where a team is. Cause when you say where a team is, you really only have to say like where a GM is.
Right. Or in the Commander's case, where the head coach is. Because he's the guy. Which, by the way, my favorite moment of the pre-draft presser was Mayhew when it might have been you who asked him, who was like, what do you do if you got 2 players that are similar? And he goes, I look at coach and I go, which one do you want?
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely like one of the only insightful and human things that they said because they're playing cards close to the vest, obviously.
Of course.
But that really crystallizes the dynamic of that front office.
Right. And the other thing, too, between scouts and agents, or I should say scouts and GMs, is when you get to the GM level, politics are involved. And I don't think people realize that as much. I'll use an NBA example because I was talking to somebody this weekend about the whole Wizards situation. And it's like, well, why would the Sixers trade Tyrese Maxey and here? Well, it's like because Joel Embiid and Bradley Beal are super tight. And if Joel wants Brad, then maybe the Wizards wind up getting Tyrese Maxey, even though no sane GM on basketball standards would, at this point in their careers, trade Bradley Beal for Tyrese Maxey or Tyrese Maxey for Bradley Beal. But like those kinds of things happen. Do you not want to tick off an agent? And I don't think that happens a ton in like the first round, but like guys definitely do favors. I would say probably sometimes in the league, perhaps later in drafts, but certainly in the media. And I think that is something to keep in mind for fans when they consume all this draft stuff is, if you're doing a 3-round mock draft and you're someone at ESPN or one of these big shops, play a Bleacher Report or whoever that like really shapes, and that's your thing, right? Not someone in your position on a beat who might do a mock draft, but someone who's like doing 5 or 6 of them over the course of January to April. You might throw a guy a bone in a 3rd-round pick where you don't even have to write the paragraph to do a favor for an agent to get their guy some 3rd-round love that scouts really don't have until the 5th or 6th. Like, those things happen. We can be adults about them and realize that that's just a part of the gig. Now, how much is that happening in first rounds? I do think like probably some 2nd-round guys maybe get a little bit of love, and then it's like, oh my God, he dropped. And it's like, well, he never was actually that high in the first place. The agent just had the ear of the right guys at the right networks, and it seemed like he was going to be a late 1st-round pick.
Yeah, and I think like the extension to that, like the thing that we're seeing this year, and we always see it every year, right? Is with the Stroud, the S2 part was like that came after some reports that like Houston didn't love Stroud anyway, and they might move down. And someone pointed out, hey, CJ Stroud has David Mulugeta as his agent, who also represented Deshaun Watson. And, obviously Deshaun and David Mulugeta didn't have a great exit from Houston. Is that a part of this? And I think the answer is, and you can watch the big national newsbreakers or you can talk to people around the league, like, I think there's a lot of smoke and people are not sure how much fire is there. I think people really don't know what the Texans are going to do. And like, if they, is this a gambit, to get someone to move up? Is this, do they really not like Stroud? Everybody wants like the truth. They want to know the thing. They want to know what's up. And I totally get that. But I think that right now, the answer is we don't know.
Right. No. We'll get our best guess, by the way. They call this a horizontal tease in the business, Sam, because tomorrow in this time, my guy Landry Locker is going to join us from 610 Sports in Houston. So 24 hours from now, we'll be talking to Landry from Houston. Horizontal tease, vertical tease within the show. 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about Ime Udoka. Sam Fortier is with us right now for a few more minutes here on the Team 980. All right, Logan and I did, and I just in general have spent way too much time on ESPN's new mock draft simulator over the last like 72 hours. But the thing that I find interesting is basically every situation that I'm faced with when I'm on the board at 16 makes me want to trade down. Do you think, one, that is the most likely thing that they're going to want to do? And two, here's the other part that everyone seems to forget when you're throwing around tweets of like, oh, just trade down and take Forbes or Banks or whoever. It's like, you got to have a willing trade partner. Is there someone who you think could fall player-wise that a team behind the Commanders is going to want to come up and take?
Great question. And I think if the top 4 prospects for them, the 2 corners and the 2 O-linemen don't fall.
Which 2 O-linemen, by the way?
I would say Skoronski and Paris Johnson.
Okay. That would be my 2. But some people have Darnell Wright. Some people have whoever.
Right. And I think if they do stay at 16 and Darnell Wright's there, I think they could take him. Like, sure. I think that there's a total path to them, loving him. But if they do want to move down, I could see, maybe it's a receiver. Like I think Smith and Jigma could be there. I think that there are teams that could want to move up, but like it's a little too early to tell. And if they can get good value, if they can get, a 4th or even a 5th, an extra add-on to move back 2 or 3 spots or 4 spots even, like I think that's absolutely something you do. Martin Mayhew mentioned it in the presser, like he's had better luck in his career moving down than moving up. And I think last year, when you get those extra picks and you get Howell and you get Cole Turner and some of those, obviously you still get Jahan Dotson. Like I think that was a big plus for them.
Do you buy any of they're going to try to stack assets in the 24 draft just in case for Caleb Williams nonsense? Or I'm going to call it nonsense, but rumors. Because it's not nonsense. That kid's ridiculous.
I mean, there's 2 layers to this. One, if a team is picking first and Caleb Williams is what we expect him to be, like they're not trading it no matter how many assets
Correct.
He have. Like,
Correct.
Because they're about to have like the most valuable thing in the world, which is a franchise quarterback, especially on a rookie deal. The second component to that is I don't think that this front office – I'm not saying that they're disregarding the future, but I think that they are just focusing on what do we have to do to maximize our number of wins in 2023 so that we can have a good audition for this new owner and that we can get retained past this year. Because I really think they know they probably need to make the playoffs, maybe win a playoff game to keep their jobs. And so, this is why I have the theory that, they're going to pick – a player, no matter what position it is, no matter who it is, they're going to pick a player from like the Big Ten or the SEC that has a really extensive play history, probably like, 1,700 plus college snaps, because that's what they did last year with Jahan Dotson. They took a lot of players that had like extensive experience. And so, because I think they just need them to play right away.
Yeah, this is a thing I can't figure out though exactly. Like everyone talks about offensive line, corner, and then the other third, I guess, most talked about position would be edge. It's like, well, if one of the top guys falls, could they because of the Sweat Young thing? And like obviously that is an intriguing option. But if they draft a corner, where does that guy play? And if they draft an offensive lineman, where does that guy play? I'm not saying you can't upgrade on what they have, but I am genuinely curious how they shuffle the pieces. We'll go corner first. Let's say Witherspooner or Gonzalez does fall, or they get Forbes or Banks or one of those guys either at 16 or falls down. What's their starting lineup, and how does that guy get on the field most quickly?
Yeah, for corner, I really just don't see Gonzalez or Witherspoon dropping. But
I don't
if you're
either,
talking
but
about, and I don't think that Porter is a great scheme fit here. I know that he did play more zone as a junior than he played a lot of press and bump and run as a senior. But I think Forbes and Banks would make more sense. They're probably more Banks just because Forbes is so skinny. But I mean Banks, like I think that you could move Kendall Fuller into the slot. I think that that could make sense. I think you could shuffle it around, and you just want top end talent. I think Benjamin St. Juste flashed last year, but obviously you need to see him stay healthy. If you go offensive line, I think there's a really clear path, particularly if you take like Darnell Wright, who I think is better at right tackle than he is at left tackle. You put Wright at right tackle, you can move Wiley to right guard, you move Cosby to left guard, and you keep Leno and Nick Gates as your center, or you draft a center. I think that would be a totally feasible starting lineup. And the other component that I would say here is if they don't go those two positions, I wouldn't be if Bijan Robinson is there, I could see them taking him, and I could see them taking a tight end. I would say my top four positions in terms of likelihood are probably corner, O-line, running back if Bijan's there, and tight end.
That is interesting and is enough to start a fire on the internet if we really want to. Sam Fortier, Washington Post with us. So the offensive line one to me is actually, yeah, I agree with you. It's obvious. It's just they have not really put that out there. Maybe it's because they don't want to tick off Wiley if they don't have to, but I'd have to imagine when they signed him, they were like, look, man, if this falls, you played some guard and we're gonna move you. I have to think that's the case. But that would make sense to me, and I think their offensive line is significantly better that way.
And I could also see an argument for like, okay, we draft a left tackle no matter whom it is. Like, if they believe in that guy, I could see Charles Leno being on the table in terms of being cut.
I
you know
agree.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
That's a totally possible option.
Totally. And then if they go corner and get our Syracuse guy, Matthew Bergeron, or someone like that, a Cody Mock in the second round, like those two could play guard too. So like that, they could start at left guard, get a year of NFL experience under their belt, and then kick out to left tackle next year. It just depends on who the guy, like Skoronski could do the same thing if somehow he falls to you at 16. So like there are options there, like Wright or someone who's definitely a tackle is to me where it gets super interesting, where it's like, I know you can upgrade, but you say you're happy, so who gets booted? The Kendall in the slot thing scares the daylights out of me because while he was great right before the Alex Smith trade in the slot, he was PFF's #1 corner that year in the slot. He hasn't really been good in the slot since. And that I would try to keep him outside, which does make do they try to kick St. Juste back in? Probably not after the year he had. Do they wait for him to get hurt? Hopefully that's not the case again this year. But that's the one that that's why I wonder, like a guy like Brian Branch. Or, do you wait and do like a Tre'Vius Hodges Tomlinson later who's better suited inside? Like it's not that I think that they're set at those positions. It's just that how do they actually shuffle them to get their first-round pick on the field in a year where spending a first-round pick on a guy who's not going to play doesn't make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair point. And I should go back and amend that because I absolutely think safety is ahead of is like the third likeliest position. I just totally forgot forgot about Branch. I think that's a really great point. And if Hodges Tomlinson, like I was talking to a personnel guy the other day, if Hodges Tomlinson were like 2 inches taller, they were like, he might be like my favorite corner in the draft, just like because of the way that he plays. And like, I think he does all the right things. He's just a little undersized. But no, you're right. I mean, they would have to figure out, because I don't think you're putting BSJ in there. Maybe you say, hey, Banks, like, can you go in there and play? Like you're very quick. Forbes inside just does not feel tenable at 166 pounds.
No,
but
with the run responsibilities that modern day nickel players have, no shot. Like
right.
he tries, but in the NFL, you need a lot more than try.
Right, exactly. So it's tough, but yeah, I would say Branch would make sense for that exact reason, right? Because it's like, okay, we're gonna have him as our Buffalo nickel. We're gonna go 3 safety sets. Like this dude can make plays. He can cover in the slot, but he can also like defend the run. So it's a really fascinating thing. And I would say one more component to this is Eric Bieniemy has a type of his offensive linemen, right? Like they all pretty much fit like 6'4", 6'5" in terms of guards, tackles, between 304 and 321. Nick Gates is bigger than both of his centers that he had in Kansas City. And if they went after a bigger prospect, like say an Osiris Torrance or a Darnell Wright, like is that telling us something about the offensive line that they want to build here? Because obviously in Kansas City, they had a pass blocking line, one of the best in the league. Are they trying to take a different approach here?
That's super interesting too. I also think there's a great chance, like 3rd, 4th round, that there's a couple of centers that are super intriguing. Your Luke Whipplers, your Joe Tippmans, all those types of guys that are certainly going to be in play. All right, last thing for Sam Fortier on the way out here. Of course, read his work, WashingtonPost.com/sports. You spent a lot of time kind of doing some behind-the-scenes draft work. I know you're working on a big piece. You don't need to talk about that until it's out. But as you've kind of gone through this process of talking to folks in the scouting space, talking to coaches, talking to folks in the workout space, you already had one piece come out from Exos where a lot of the top draft prospects. Oh damn! I literally had an Exos shirt on yesterday. That would have been good. But Exos, where a lot of the top draft prospects work out in preparation for the combine, and then go back as veterans and continue to hone their crafts. What's kind of the thing that you've learned / changed your mind on, shifted on the most this offseason, talking to your group of people leading up to this draft?
Wow. Well, not to do a shameless plug on the radio, but
3, 2, 1, go.
This is called a horizontal pitch or whatever you said earlier. There is a new evolving study in terms of body composition, in terms of, what is the right weight for a player to be at and what can they sustain. I got a story on it coming out tomorrow morning in the Post. And I really like whenever you hear someone pitching something, right, you always got to be skeptical. Okay, like what's the angle here? But, I spent 2 months thinking about this, talking to people on the record, off the record. And like, I'm a believer in a new metric that is gaining traction in the NFL in terms of how does this help us identify talent? How does this help us mitigate injury?
Yeah, considering I know what the metric is because we talked about it, I'm excited, and I also can't wait to read the story because while we talked about it, I don't know what everyone in the story said because that's how stories work. So I will be reading that. Everyone can check that out tomorrow morning, either when they throw the newspaper at your front door or at WashingtonPost.com/sports. Sam, always good to talk, my friend. Thanks for coming on the show, and we'll do it again soon.
For sure. Thank you for having me, man. I always appreciate it.
You got it. All right, a couple thoughts on Ime Udoka being hired by the Rockets, even though we don't know what he did in Boston, next here on the Team 980.
Daniel Snyder has agreed to sell the Washington Commanders.
Are you going to have it?
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always alive as well on the free Odyssey app. Thanks again to Sam Fortier for joining us. We, of course, also streaming live on the Team 980's YouTube page. Make sure you like and subscribe there. We also post highlights of the show. We just, generally have a great time. So you can watch us, you can listen. However it is you are watching or listening, we appreciate you. All right, the Houston Rockets have hired Ime Udoka as their new head coach. Udoka is a phenomenal coach. He's probably the best coach on the market, and in that way, this is really not that interesting of a story because, cool, good for the Houston Rockets, right? Well, here's the problem. Ime Udoka, when we last heard of him, was the head coach of the Boston Celtics. Then, stunningly, after just 1 year in which he took the Celtics to the finals, he was suspended for the entire 2022-2023 season and then ultimately dismissed because he had had an inappropriate relationship with a female staffer. And then on top of that, apparently not just the inappropriate relationship, but had used derogatory language towards her and perhaps had also used the power he had to make her life worse at work. We don't know exactly what happened, which makes this report from Adrian Wojnarowski kind of frustrating to hear. Here's Woj on ESPN earlier today.
I think as much as anything, the fact that the league office, who had reviewed the independent report that the Celtics had commissioned in the aftermath of Udoka's improper relationship with a woman in that organization within the basketball realm in Boston, that there was nothing that the league office was telling them precluded Houston or any other team from hiring Ime Udoka, that there was nothing that they found to be disqualifying to work again in the NBA. Certainly, there was an initial year-long suspension in Boston that turned, into a dismissal as Joe Mazzulla was having success with that Boston team. But I think for Houston, certainly they met Udoka in person. They spent time with him. They talked to a lot of people who've worked with him, who've known him, who vouched for him through the years in different organizations, and came to the decision that they would be willing to offer him their head coaching job and make a significant commitment to him contractually.
So there's a lot of lawyer speak in there, and I think it's important to parse that out. They found nothing in their independent investigation that said he could no longer work in the NBA. That is an incredibly high bar. That does not mean the bar was he didn't do anything that means he shouldn't work in the NBA anymore, or at the very least shouldn't have perhaps had to kind of re-earn his stripes, right? Okay, you're going to go and be an assistant coach for a couple years and prove that you can exist in an organization without being problematic, and then perhaps we'll give you another shot as a head coach. Or I'm going to go, do some therapy and some sensitivity training and learn about workplace culture before I come back and have a job. As opposed to he was ultimately suspended earlier but dismissed in February. And by April, just over 2 months later, February 16th, Joe Mazzulla was officially hired in Boston. And we're on April 25th, and Ime Udoka has another job? Did he really learn? I mean, it's possible. I would assume getting caught doing this is a pretty quick learning experience. But I think the problem is we're caught between the lawyer stuff. They didn't find anything that bars him from working in the NBA. Yeah, because they didn't throw him out of the league. That was true from the second he was suspended. He was suspended for a year. He wasn't permanently banned. The suspension was not from the NBA even. The suspension was from the Celtics, and they dismissed him. So he was available to be hired. The Brooklyn Nets damn near hired him, and probably would have if it hadn't been leaked and then met with such vile by absolutely repulsed NBA fans everywhere who believe in some level of decency that says when you get fired for inappropriate conduct, you don't get to go coach Kevin Durant next week. And they probably would have done that. And then Jacques Vaughn won a couple of games. And it was like, actually, maybe we'll just stick with Jacques Vaughn. And that was back in what was that, October, November? After the Nets fired Nash? And then he just kind of sat around and then was ultimately dismissed when they hired Missoula full-time in February. But there's that legal standard that says, yes, based off this investigation, we have not kicked him permanently out of the league. And, hey, it's not the right thing to do. There's also a battle here between the fact that I think anybody who would be subject to some kind of HR internal investigation would want to keep that, internal, and the fact that the NBA is generally speaking a public entity that we all consume, and that teams are things that are entities that we root for. That I don't necessarily want to root for Ime Udoka if I'm a Rockets fan if I think he stinks as a human. And I know a lot of you're going, wait, whoa, we're doing this again after we did all this with Dan Snyder and the Commanders? And it's like, yes, because as much as you might not be that person, someone else listening absolutely is. And if that's you, I am you. I don't like rooting for teams that I don't feel good rooting about. It's an emotional decision. It's not based purely off of loyalty and geography for me. I have different feelings about who I root for, and I often find myself rooting for players and not teams. I understand that most people root for laundry, and that's fine. But this is why, sports fans are nuts, and it's the best. In a way, it also can make sports be great, like the civic pride and all those types of things. I talked about it yesterday with the Welcome to Wrexham story, right? This little small town in Wales that is united by this team that two Hollywood superstars come in and embrace, and next thing you know, their town is better. All that stuff is great, but if I am a Rockets fan today, I would like to know more about what happened in Boston. But if I'm the Celtics in the league, I go, sorry, that's an internal investigation. And I will say, unlike some other leagues that have had problems with this, mainly the National Women's Soccer League, where incredibly problematic coaches got passed around the league and were allowed to get new jobs because no one freaking talked to each other, and thus there were more players that were harassed and sexually assaulted in some cases by coaches. Yeah, sorry, that's what happened there. In this particular case, at least the Rockets talk to the Celtics and the league. The Rockets have some sense, if not complete sense, of knowing what happened. But sorry, the history of sports to me suggests that we shouldn't trust owners to be judges in these kinds of situations. The Rockets did a lot of searching and did what they can do to make themselves be able to sleep at night to hire the guy they wanted to hire. And wanting to hire him is absolutely a smart basketball decision. He's an exceptional coach. And the things he particularly brings, I think, are very good for the Houston Rockets. And so I get it. But that shouldn't be the justification for allowing someone who potentially was really, really problematic and harmful in a workplace to resume the most powerful position in an organization, or one of the most powerful positions in an organization, as the head coach. From Woj's reporting on ESPN.com, an independent law firm probe into Udoka found that he used crude language in his dialogue with a female subordinate before the start of an improper relationship, a workplace relationship with her, an element that significantly factored into the severity of Udoka's initial suspension, sources told ESPN in September. Those investigative findings, which described Udoka's verbiage as especially concerning coming from a workplace superior, contributed to what became an impossible pathway back to his reinstatement as Celtics coach. The power dynamic associated with the superior's improper relationship with a staff member was the primary finding and policy violation cited in the law firm's report, which was commissioned by the Celtics and completed in September, sources said. That is vague. It is also telling. He certainly could have learned from this, but let's not get it twisted. The Rockets hired Ime Udoka not because they think he deserves a second chance and because they did all this homework that says, oh no, deep down there's really a good guy in there. They did it because he's a basketball coach that's going to win games. Let's call a spade, and without the lack of transparency that came from the Celtics, which I kind of understand. Their decisiveness and their transparency came in their actions. They were like, "You're gone, see ya," without the league saying more on this. I really hope that Udoka embraces the questions that should come to him at his first public comments since all this happened, which will be his introductory press conference for another head coaching job. If he skirts all that and doesn't own it, that's crap. You did it. You got to face the music. And to be honest, if he faces the music, owns up to it, is really forthcoming and talks about what he learned and, shows some understanding of why what he did was so bad, okay. I'm not saying he's got to go to Shame Island forever. But he didn't even do the token interview here. He didn't even sit down with someone to go, yeah, I really messed up. He just got another job. And that doesn't really sit well with me. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. When we get back, real things, real people said into real microphones. But first, a look at what's trending.
Here's what's trending.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always alive as well on the free Odyssey app. And Anthony's singing along. I thought for a second, I looked up because I was looking at the audio list for Real Things, and I looked back at the screen to where I could see you. I thought you were yawning first because your mouth was so open singing that song.
Sometimes I don't know that my camera's up, so that's what it was. Caught me off guard.
Stay ready. You know what they say.
Stay ready so you ain't got to get ready.
That's right. It's a real thing someone probably once said into a, real microphone.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5-11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
The culture is actually damn good.
About that time, chaps. Let's hear from Jimmy on Jimmy. Jimmy Butler on playoff Jimmy after he dropped 56 last night.
2 quick questions, Jimmy. You've denied it before, but is playoff Jimmy a thing? Are you ready to?
It's not a thing. It's not. I just be hooping.
I saw someone on Levitard's show today make a really great point, which is like, in a way, Jimmy Butler is bad for the NBA because it just proves that the regular season, dudes can just turn it up to a different level because of what he does in the playoffs. But I also think that's just the reality of a regular season versus the playoffs. We are so ruined in America by the NFL, where every single week guys give it their all because they play once a week and there's only 17 games. And if you don't give it your all, you can't. There's no saving anything for the playoffs. It's not a thing in the NFL. In Major League Baseball, they play 162 games. In the NBA, they play 82. In the NHL, they play 82. Think NHL dudes play as hard as they freaking can? No, playoff hockey's different. Playoff hockey's awesome. It's so different than the regular season. And that's fine. It's still, if you're a hockey fan, great. I think the same is true for the NBA. The best basketball you will see in the entire planet between October and April is in the NBA. And then you will see a better brand of that from April to June because every game means that much more. And part of that, too, is the best players go from playing 30 minutes a night to 40 minutes a night. It's just how it is. People need to stop being mad at math.
And also, they don't have to worry about playing back-to-backs. They don't have to worry about playing 4 games in 5 days or 3 games in 5 days. Things of that nature. So I think that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. Dylan Brooks has got a lot to worry about. Speaking of math, hey, Shaq, what did LeBron do to Dylan Brooks?
LeBron at 2020, Dylan Brooks said he don't respect nobody until they get 40. 20 and 20 is 40. So hopefully he'll respect it. They did what they were supposed to do.
That's my favorite Shaq thing. Great player does something insane. Shaq's just like, oh, well, that's what he was supposed to do.
That's a good Shaq impersonation.
Kind of mumble down here like this. I'm not, look, Dan, I know they got done at 6:30, but Danny doesn't need to feel threatened. I'm not coming for him. My Barkley's not as good. My Shaq's not as good. That's why.
His Barkley is outstanding.
You saw, by the way, did you see Danny in the FanDuel commercial?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, yeah. There's a FanDuel commercial out now with Charles Barkley and then a young Chuck that's a CGI. And the young Chuck is voiced by Danny.
Oh, that is crazy.
Yeah, no, I can't.
I haven't seen the commercial, but I didn't know he was the guy behind the voice.
Yeah, they announced that last week.
Oh, that's a lit.
That guy gave you comedy lessons.
Yes, he did.
And then you still weren't that good. Oh!
Shots fired, man.
Shots fired.
And I took that personally.
Was this shots fired from Draymond Green at Julius Randle, who didn't talk to the media after being benched? I don't know. Anthony thought it might have. I just think it's Draymond worrying about the Warriors, and he doesn't care whether he starts, comes off the bench, whatever. He just wants to win.
The one thing that I didn't want to happen was I come back and everybody's like, oh, this worked. Well, Loon comes out the starting lineup. That's you're an awful teammate if that's what you think should happen. Looney just had 20 rebounds, 9 assists, dominated the game. You don't then go to him and say, hey, your reward is to come out of the starting lineup. That's, as a leader of a team, that's how you lose guys. Coach called me a day later and said, all right, this is what we're doing. But you haven't come off the bench in 9 years. How are you in a playoff game? How are you going to feel about that? I said, well, Coach, number one, who cares? Who cares how I feel about that? Doesn't matter. Feelings don't matter. You don't have time for feelings in the playoffs. You get caught in your feelings. You get caught on the the boat to Cancun. Number 2, I feel great. I'm fine. I'll be ready to go when it's time for me to go in. Big question is, do you keep coming off the bench? I don't know. I started the second half. But what I will tell you is I don't care. Most important thing to me and to guys that has played here, which is why we've won championships, is winning.
You know what separates like guys like Dylan Brooks from guys like Draymond, who are all Draymond's a gigantic pain in the ass and has done some pretty wackadoodle things. That dude is a phenomenal basketball player, and all he cares about is winning. That's the difference. Like, if you can't listen to that clip and be like, okay, I don't really like Draymond, but like I kind of like Draymond a little more now, then you don't like teamwork, you don't like winning, you don't like any of it. That's who that dude is. Sometimes he crosses lines with it, but like I love that so much, that courtesy of Draymond's podcast. All right, tomorrow on the show, Never Read the Comments. My guy Landry Locker joins us from Houston. You missed anything? Check out all the on-demand. It's the Hoffman Show, Team 980.
The Kevin Sheehan Show. Now weekdays from 10 to 1